Good evening, everyone. Myself, Deepa Karthikeyan. I'm the technical consultant of Crozum Labs. So today's session, let's have an idea of Java 8. Okay. So without any delay, let me get into today's agenda. So dealing with Java. So before getting into Java 8 features, let's see what is Java, why we want Java, and how the Java is doing all its features. Okay, how the Java's feature has been implemented. And second thing, um, can you please mute everyone? Please mute yourself. Okay, I did it. Right. So first, let's see what is Java. Why we need all those things, right? So the basic fundamental of Java is the Java Virtual Machine, the JVM. Okay. So in order to write an optimized code, the knowledge of JVM is very essential. So let's see what is JVM, what is the architecture is, just an overview. Oh, okay, not a depth thing. And then we'll see the improvement of memory in Java 8. Okay, so it is called metaspace. So actually the previous part of Java 8 memory was just replaced by metaspace thing. Okay, so we'll be dealing with all those things, and then followed by we'll be seeing the garbage collection, right? So one of the main feature of Java is garbage collection. So we'll be seeing that the basic garbage collection algorithm works on the generational algorithm, right? So we'll be seeing what is a generation algorithm, and then we'll have an idea of what kind of garbage collectors or garbage collection algorithm is used in Java 8. Okay, and followed by the programming features which we can visually see. Okay, so the functional interface, the lambda expression, for each method, default method, and static method. So these two methods, default method and static method, is used along with an interface concept, whereas this for each method is used along with the collection concept. And lambda expression, like any other in any other language, we have a similar kind of thing. So lambda expression, nothing but an anonymous expression or anonymous method. So this kind of thing is also implemented in Java 8. So let's have a let's get into the topics. So starting with what is Java, who invented Java? We all know it is James Gosling along with his fellow members who invented it in by Sun Microsystem in 1991. And actually the history of Java, if you see the history of Java, the Java was mainly invented for a set of box as a remote control system. Okay, it is mainly for an embedded system, whereas now it has been evolved so that because of the one feature which is platform independent, Java has evolved to such a long extent. Okay, it's been 30 years since it's evolved, since it's been invented, and still more 20 years it has a strong foundation in the industry. Okay, and followed by, when you get into the language Java, so we'll be getting a first thing is it is object oriented programming. Okay, so this object oriented programming, it's a language. It is based on oops concept. Okay, that's what is the definition is. But when you see deep into it, this Java is not a pure object oriented language. Okay, so if you have a pure object oriented language, which means that everything should be a class and object constraint. Okay, whereas in Java you have an exception case, which is the primitive types. So since it has or it supports primitive types, this does not comes under pure object oriented language. Okay, and the uh, and the slogan, or what they say, is write once and run anywhere, which means that it is a platform independent language. Okay, so followed by why, what is the reason why we need Java? Okay, so the first thing is Java has a very strong foundation, and if people want to get into an industry, if they learn one language that has a strong foundation, that is better for their future, right? So Java has a great foundation, and it's very easy to learn. Once if you learn, it is very easy. So you can just all the implemented languages are there in Java. So say for example, now the current industry is based on Golang, and all the cloud concepts of Jenkins, everything is based on Java. Okay, so all other languages has a strong foundation on Java. Even the Android has a strong pillar of Java, even though it has a full version implemented in Linux, but still Java is one of the pillar of Android. So it is easy to learn, and it has a rich API. So almost 4,500 APIs are available for Java developers currently. So it has a rich collection of APIs, and which helps us to develop more and more applications on it. Okay, followed by why we need to learn Java as one of the main reason. What about the job related to Java? Okay, so currently we have a huge or demand for Java developers. So say for example, this number of 36,000 is for 100 job. Okay, so it is not a mere number, it is a highly packaged job. So almost it will be like 70 lakh in Indian rupees. Okay, so Java is a highly demanded programming language, and followed by, let's see into the features. So it is a simple programming language, it is a high level programming language. Of course it is high level programming language, but still it is very friendly to the hardware. Okay, so that is one of the that is one of the difference between Java and other languages. So say for example, today the current trend of going Python. Okay, when you compare Python with Java, so you have certain features, certain differences between Python and Java. Okay, even though Python was evolved recently, and it's of course I recommend Python for machine language and data science and all those things, but still for web development and web related or service related or server side related thing, it is always the Java. It is all for also mobile development application. Java is the most recommended thing. Okay, and followed by the point called architecture neutral. So architecture neutral is nothing but the bytecode feature of Java. Okay, so you are creating it in one application, or you are creating it in one platform, so that you are running it in multiple platforms. Okay, so that is what is called architecture neutral. You're just supporting the right ones run anywhere feature. Okay, followed by multi-threaded, and this multi-threaded is very important, and multi-threaded is very important in case of parallel processing and distributed systems. So this is a thing which cannot be beaten by any other language, and of course it is secure. So I will tell you why Java is very secure in the further slides. Okay, so next, move on to Java 8's feature. So if we have such a lot of feature with Java, why do we need Java 8? So because nowadays we have a more multi-core CPUs being processed, multi-core CPU processors being used. So your language has to be updated or evolved to work on such processor. So that is the reason why Java 8 was evolved. Okay, so just to make use of this multi-core processor, and the second thing is to perform functional programming, Java 8 was evolved. And what is the pros of Java 8 is the more compact and precise code. Okay, so say for example, if you go with the features before Java 8, so you need certain iterations, certain number of loops to perform a single operation, whereas in Java 8 you can perform the same operation in a single line of code using stream APIs and lambda expressions. Okay, so readable and precise compact code is all achieved by this lambda expressions and streaming APIs. And parallel processing, of course, we have certain number of functions which performs parallel processing in Java 8. Okay, so move on to the basic execution of Java. Say for example, when I write a code on my IDE or any editors. Okay, so I used to save it in the extension .java extension, whereas then what I do is I compile my Java program, my source code, will be converted into bytecode, and this bytecode is the one which provides the architectural neutral feature. Okay, so this is the one that helps us to work on many platforms. Now uh this we are saying like we have a Java virtual machine, but what about this creating thing? So if you try to download Java, okay, so you'll be getting two kind of folders. One is JDK, another one is JRE. Okay, so JDK is the one which helps you to develop a Java program. So all the library features are available in your JDK. Whereas what is JRE? JRE is the Java runtime environment, and this is the folder that contains all the files that together create the JVM instance. Okay, so here you have to be very clear that JVM is not a file, or it is not available in a physical memory. Okay, it is an instance, it is a runtime instance being created. So if you check on those two folders, JDK and JRE, you cannot find a file called JVM. Okay, so it is an instance, or it is an object, or it is an environment created by JRE. Okay, so just from the concept, or in the point of view of operating system, okay, if we used to say like a data or a file when gets into a processor becomes a process, right? Just like that, the file inside a JRE when gets into a processor becomes JVM. Okay, so and this JVM or is created by JRE, right? So this JRE is platform dependent. So you can see the color differentiation here. So these OS X, Linux, and Windows are different operating system. So your JRE is platform dependent, whereas your Java code which you develop is platform independent. Okay, so moving on to the basic operation. So if I get into the closer view, so I'll be seeing that I'm just giving my .java file into a compiler, and I'm getting a class file being generated, and this is what we called as class file. This is the class file, and class file is not the term we generally use in an object oriented programming. Class file name, that is not the class file. This is the class file which we generally use in our term throughout our PPT. Will be mentioning class file as this bytecode file being generated by the compiler. Okay, and this is the input we are giving it to Java virtual machine. And inside Java virtual machine, we have this Java virtual machine is a quite like a Superman, which has three managers to do all his tasks. And the number one is class loader, and followed by the bytecode verifier and git compile. So class load verifier is the one which helps us to load the class file, this particular bytecode file, into the JVM. And bytecode verifier is the one which is very important, or which plays the main role of security of Java files. Okay, so when we say that Java is very secure, it means that it's because of this bytecode verifier, because this bytecode verifier will help us to see whether the particular Java file is coming from a very authorized source, or whether any changes are made in that bytecode file. So changes is what we say as virus program, right? So if we have any virus programs inside inside this class file being inserted, so those kind of things are checked by this bytecode verifier. And followed by the JIT compiler. So JIT compiler, when you see JIT compiler, it is actually a compiler. So Java has both interpreter and a compiler. Okay, so JIT compiler is very much useful when you are trying to load a particular method again and again. Okay, so in that case, JIT compiler is very much useful. And this is my depth view. It's not a depth view. So overall architecture of my JVM. Okay, so the first subsystem, first manager becomes the class loader, and this is the JVM related memory. Okay, JVM dealing certain kind of memory structures, right? So these memories are the memories which the JVM uses it. Okay, so we have method area where the loader class related information will be stored, and heap area where our objects will be stored, and stack where our reference variables and primitive variables will be stored. And there is a difference between heap and stack, I will tell you. Okay, So PC register, you know that the next instruction will be stored here, information about the next instruction. And native methods in the sense, Java was mainly developed with C language. Okay, so if you see, and also we have certain methods and libraries for C, libraries in C language. Okay, so those kind of libraries, native method libraries, is nothing but the libraries or code that supports JVM. Even JVM itself is written in a native method, native language called native language. One of the language is C language. So these libraries are available here, and to make a connection or to make an interface between these libraries, which is in native language, and with the Java, so we have an interface here, and this execution engine is what the third manager we speak about. So this contains the JIT compiler and interpreter, everything. Okay, so we can have a detailed view here. So if you see here, so my class file is being given as an input to my class loader. So inside, if you see, this class loader has three kind of jobs. This manager does three jobs. One is loading, another one is linking, and followed by initialization, right? So what is loading? So loading is nothing but loading your class file. So here I'm speaking about the bytecode, okay, the generated bytecode of the compiler generated bytecode. So loading the class file, and here we have three types of class loaders. One is bootstrap class loader, second one is extension class loader, third one is application class loader. So if you see here, when I'm writing some program called student, okay, so I'm writing some program, and this program will be available in my class path. So this is executed by my application class loader. But when JVM requests to load a particular class file, this is not the first step that does it. Okay, here we have a hierarchy to be preserved. So what we called as delegation hierarchy. And first, speaking about that, first initially the request to load a particular class file will be given to the bootstrap class loader. Of course, application class loader gets it. Application class loader, without processing it, forwards it to the extension class loader. Extension class loader, without processing it, forwards it to bootstrap class loader. And this bootstrap class loader will check that particular class file in rt.jar file. Okay, so you might have heard this, you might have seen this file rt.jar when you are installing your jar jdk, when you are installing your Java file. Okay, it is under JRE. So this this bootstrap class loader is intended to check the class file only in rt.jar location, not in any other location. And similarly, extension class loader can check your class whether that particular class file you're requesting is available in lib jre slash lib slash extension file, extension location, extension module. Okay, so similarly, application class loader is intended to see or check your class path only in on your check your class file only in class path. Okay, so going to the next, once the class file has been loaded. Okay, so now my class file has been loaded by the application class loader because my program is available in the class path. So it is loaded. What is the next step? So the next step is linking. So linking has three kind of operations. Okay, so number one is verifying. Verifying is what we do in bytecode verifier. This is what is bytecode verifier does. Okay, this is the operation here. So it verifies whether the bytecode is coming from authorized source or whether it is in a proper format. So all was done by this bytecode verifier in the class load, inside the class loader. Okay, and the second step is preparing. Prepare is nothing but, you might have seen certain static variables inside your program. So say for example, static int I is equal to 10. If this is my code, so static is the kind of variable. Static is an instance where it's a keyword which is used to specify the static variable. So static integer of type integer I is my variable name, which is equal to 10. Okay, so this is my code. In this preparation steps, what happens is I'll be allocating a variable I of size 4 bytes because it is an integer, right? So we'll be allocating an integer with a variable name I of 4 bytes. Okay, so that particular allocation, memory allocation, followed by the default value initialization is done here. Default value in the sense, for integer the default value is 0. So your memory will be allocated and the default value will be given to that particular variable on this step. Okay, followed by the resolve step. So resolve where all the symbolic references has been resolved here. Okay, and followed by the initialization. So initialization is where your value, what you are giving in your code, is being initialized to the variable. Say for example, in the previous example we said like static int I is equal to 10, right? So initially in this prepare stage it was 0, the value was initialized. Only in this initialization step 10 will be initialized to your variable I. Okay, so this is what the class loader does, and followed by the memory utilized by the JVM. So we have these kind of memories utilized by the JVM. So we have method area. Method area is the one which is maintained by JVM, which means which is maintained throughout the JVM. Okay, it is not based on a thread or based on an application, based on a particular class file. Okay, so this method area has method per class structures, class file related things. Okay, so followed by the heap area. So heap area will be having all the objects. So all your objects will be available in the heap, and objects in the sense everything is an object. Okay, and if you see Java is a full Java is mostly other than this primitive types, we have everything as objects and classes. So this heap area is the one which has to be maintained, so that this is the one where the garbage collection plays a main role on it. Okay, and followed by this stack area. So stack area is the one which is maintained for each thread. So we have stack area maintained for each thread. Each stack has a stack frames and related information for a particular thread, followed by PC register. As I said, it was about the next instructions to be executed information, and followed by this native method stack is nothing but the stack area for the native methods. Say for example, the other C related codes, we have certain stack to be maintained for the such codes, right? So it is maintained by this native method stack, and followed by this execution engine. So the third manager of our JVM, execution engine. So it has the interpreter. So this interpreter is the one which executes all your all the Java files. Okay, it executes the code based on demand. Okay, it does not execute, or it does not fully convert your code, fully execute your code. It is based on demand. If you need an employee class, okay, you are have with an employee class. If you need a department class, okay, here department class. So it is based on demand. Okay, so but this interpreter has one disadvantage, that if you are writing a particular, or if you are executing a particular method or a particular function again and again, so this interpreter will generate code again and again. That makes a less, how to say, that makes a less optimization. Okay, so which does it again and again is not a good way of dealing a code, right? So for that case we have a part called JIT compiler. So JIT compiler is the one which is mainly used to deal code that is executed again and again. Okay, so we have intermediate code generator, code optimizer, target code generator. So target code generator is based on the native code, native languages. Say for example, it's a machine language, zeros and ones. Such kind of such conversion from target language to native language was done by this target code generator. And profiler, which keeps all the details about this operations. Okay, and followed by the garbage collection. Of course, garbage collection is the main feature of Java, and in mostly all Java features, every Java architecture or versions deals generational garbage collection. Okay, So we'll be see what is the generation garbage collection, followed by native method interface is the interface which we deal with the C codes. Okay, it is just an interface between our Java language and C language. So because OS is very much close with C language, so we have this native method libraries and we have this interface to deal with our Java code and C code. Okay, so followed by, so we have seen all these things, right? So let's have a small recap. Okay, so we have this initialization class loader, which does the loading and initialization part. We have three types of loaders: bootstrap, extension, and application class loader. If you see, bootstrap is the parent class loader. Okay, and this bootstrap class loader was implemented in C language. Okay, so if you see, if you try to find out the bootstrap class loaders file, you cannot find, because there is no file written in Java for bootstrap class loader. So whereas the child of bootstrap class loader, which is the extension class loader, has the Java file which is available, which is implemented in Java, and it was implemented by Sun Microsystems since they started it, right? So followed by the system or application class loader, which is again the child of extension class loader. So we'll see a program related to this class loader. Okay, so this is the summary of what we have discussed so far about the class loaders. So bootstrap class loader was implemented in C, and this extension class loader is based on this class file, and application class loader is based on this class file. And the bootstrap class loader tried to find a class file from this particular location, jre lib.rt.java, whereas this extension class loader tries to find a file from lib/ext folder. Okay, and application class loader will try to find it on a class path. And when you try to see the parent of the class loaders through our program, we will see a program now. So through our programs, when we try to see the parent of the class loaders, bootstrap class loader will not have a parent. It will just return as a null because it is implemented in C language. Okay, so it will not be visible for us. Whereas extension class loader, whereas application class loader has a parent class called extension class loader, so we'll be getting this particular class file. Okay, so now let's see a program. So if you see here, I guess it is visible. So if you see here, this is my Java program where I'm trying to show you the class loaders available. So I'm just using this class loader test1 file. So class loader test1 is nothing but this particular file. Okay, this is the file. And if I compile this, I'll be getting a class file, right? So on this class file, I'm just getting my class and I'm just checking which class loader has loaded this particular class loader test file. Okay, and followed by this, I'm just trying to check the class loader. Up to this, it will be my application class loader. So I'm just getting the parent of application class loader, which is the extension class loader. And when I try again with the get parent method, the parent of extension class loader will be the bootstrap class loader, but that particular implementation class file will not be available because it is implemented in native language, right? So if we see my part, okay, see here. So the first thing, this is my class file, right? So this is available in my class path. So my application class loader went and checked first the request was being processed to from application class loader to extension and then to bootstrap. Again, the bootstrap checked on its rt.jar file. It is not available in that. So the request is again forwarded back to the extension class loader. The extension class loader checked it in the ext module. It is not available there. So the request is again forwarded back to application class loader where it is being processed. So this is the implementation of application class loader. If you see here, app class loader, application class loader. Okay, so this is the parent class. This is the class which executed or which loaded my class file. Okay, so here I am just checking my class file for the parent class loader of the class loader which executed this. It is the parent class loader of is execution extension class loader. Followed by I'm getting here null because there is no class file for bootstrap class loader. It is implemented in C language. So that's why I'm getting this null value. Okay, and follow this. One second. Okay. So the delegation principle, or how it works, the delegation hierarchy, how it works. First, the request to, as I said, we are just recapping all these things, right? So the request to load a class file is being generated. The application class loader just forwards it. Extension class loader forwards it. Bootstrap class loader checks whether it is available in this particular path. It is not available. If it is not available, the request is again back to the extension class loader. Here again we are checking whether it is available in the ext folder. If it is not available, the request is back to the application class loader, and this class loader checks it in the class path. This is how our program went. Okay, followed by the other principle. So other principle of class loader is visibility. So visibility is in the sense, so your the class loaded by the child class loader. Okay, so this the child class loader can see all the files loaded by your parent class loader. Say for example, extension class loader can see all the files loaded by the bootstrap class loader, whereas the reverse is not possible. And uniqueness, so at a time, okay, so your class will be loaded only once. Even if you try to load your class more than one time, it is not possible. Your class will be loaded only once. In such a way, all these class loaders has been designed. Followed by here, so this one thing we need to know is when we are trying to load a particular class file. Okay, so this JVM creates a type of class. Say for example, if I'm trying to create an object, what we usually do, we use the new operator to create an object, or you to create or to allocate a memory, right? So I'm trying to load a class file, but I'm not allocating a memory for my class file. That is done by the JVM. So it creates a type. This class is a class name available in the Java libraries, and it just creates an instance for my loaded class. So if you see this particular line, okay, so here I'm just calling my class file. I'm just creating a reference variable for my class file, and here I'm not using any new keyword to allocate my class variable, okay, class instance. This instance was created by JVM. So you can see the difference between this line and this line. I'm just acquiring the instance created by the JVM, and I'm not creating it in this line. So this instance creation of your class file, loader class file, is done by JVM. Okay. And followed by the initialization. So initialization, regarding the initialization or loading a particular file, we can load our particular class file manually by using this particular method, for name. So in this for name, we can specify whether the initialization should be done using a Boolean variable. Okay, it's one of the Boolean variable or argument to be passed inside this for name, and we can also specify whether which type of class loader has to be used, whether it's an extension class loader, bootstrap class loader. We can specify that. So this method helps us to tell whether a particular class file can be which class file can be used. One second, let me take up the pen. This class road, and your class static method will also be enclosed in static field. Everything is done by the class loader. That's what we saw on the previous diagram. And here I just want to show you the basic difference between a stack and a heap. A stack memory is the one which holds the reference variable followed by the variable, so followed by the value. So if it is a primitive type, so as I said, Java has one exception for a fully object-oriented programming language, that is the reference variable. So see the left side, this part is my code here. Okay, so for this code, how my memory is being allocated. Say for example, the string, I'm just having my string variable. String is the reference type, right? So we'll be having a object in my heap being created. So I'm just having an object here. So URL is my variable name, but this object will be available in my heap memory. A reference to the object or the address where the particular object is being placed is available in the stack memory. So when you see here, if I try to compare this to, say for example, company name is also Crozum and URL name is also Crozum. If I try to compare this to URL name and company name using using equality operator, this address is being compared and not the actual object is being compared here. Okay, so that is the reason why we go for equals method when comparing two strings. Okay, so because it is a reference variable, so we need a method to check the object and not the address of those objects. And followed by this, we have another, I just want to show you the difference between a primitive variable, how it stores, and a reference variable, how it stores. So say for example, here I have a primitive variable, int roll number is equal to 1101. So roll number is my variable, and my value will also be available in the stack memory. You can just compare the stack memory like a key value pair. So key may be your variable name, and value is a reference value in case of an object, and actual value in case of a primitive type. So in case of a reference variable, it is available in your heap and its address is available in your stack. Okay, so this is my overall JVM memory architecture, and heap followed by non-heap memory, others. So if you see here, the main changes done in Java 8 is in the non-heap memory. Okay, so non-heap memory is the one which has information about. So it's okay. So which has information about the okay. Okay, so non-heap memory is the one where the changes has occurred in Java 8. Okay, so previously before Java 8 it was like permanent generation space, whereas in Java 8 it was meta space. Even though as a developer we are not aware of this change, it is very important to know what the change is, because we need to write an optimized code, right? So let's see what it is in detail. So if you see this non-heap memory, this is the architecture which is available before Java 8, okay, up to Java 7. So this non-heap memory is the one which contains all your metadata. Okay, so metadata in the sense data about a data. So it is like a data about all your class, all your objects, all your methods, everything else. So this is available in the permanent space, and this research space is nothing but we have a particular size for this permanent space. We have a limit to store an information, and this excess perm size is the minimum amount of perm space, and maximum perm size, this flag is to specify the maximum or the limit of my perm size, permanent space. Okay, and this is the one that made that is the main reason for Java 8's evolution to metaspace, because usually we'll be getting an error called perm space out of memory except out of memory error. Okay, so we usually get this error because we are out of memory, because we'll having a lot of metadatas, and that will make us to get this error, and that's why a meta space has been evolved. And this other memory is nothing but the memory which is needed to run the JVM. So all your JVM related codes, it's available in this other memory. Okay, so we have two types of memory other than heap. We have two memories, one is non-heap memory and other heap memory. And this in some documentation they used to say this non-heap memory as a special heap memory. They also mentioned the term as special heap memory, that is none other than this non-heap memory. Okay, and this is the limitation of permanent generation. It is out of memory error we usually get because our class loaders data is not being collected, I mean garbage collected, and we'll be running out of the meta space occupied by this meta space. So in order to avoid this, we have a Java 8 improvement called meta space. Okay, so let's see what is the difference between this permanent generation space and meta space. So if you see in the diagram, you could see this New generation or old generation, I'll just cover it in the heap part. Okay, so you just concentrate on this part. So permanent generation has a limited space here. Okay, and this native space is the space available in my OS, or space available given by my OS. Okay, so if you see here I have a limitation, whereas meta space has become a part of native memory. So I have no limits to hold my metadata, right? So this is the main improvement of Java 8. I don't have I'm having a vast amount of data, but here there is again we have a limit, but that limit is incomparable with this permanent space or permanent generation space. Okay, so this is the main advantage of Java 8 meta space, okay, which was replaced with permanent generation space, right? And here we have certain flags to be used, and meta space, we can just specify the minimum amount of meta space to be initialized when the JVM instance being created, and the maximum size of meta space to up to which the JVM can extend the class data, and the minimum free ratio is nothing but the garbage collector. So this is one of the main advantage here. For permanent generation, we don't have any garbage collecting mechanism, whereas in meta space we have the garbage collecting mechanism, and that is one of the great advantage, so that we never get the out of memory exception, out of memory error here. Okay, so we can specify the minimum amount of minimum amount of space that has to be freed up, and the maximum meta space that can be freed up, and followed by my heap area. So heap area we can just divide it into three types. So one is Eden, and sorry, young generation, another one is old generation. Eden is again divided into three parts. It is young generation is again divided into three parts. It is Eden and survivor space. So we have two survivor space. You can just say it as 0 survivor 0, or S0 S1, or from survivor space to survivor space. We can just the terms differs, but they all refer to the survivor space. So every Eden space, server space, everything has a particular limit of memory. Okay, so we can just specify these flags to specify what kind of memory we need. So just by running a program, while running a program, we can just specify the arguments, VM arguments, uh, just while running the program. Java space used to run, right? So we can just specify the arguments there, and we can run a particular file on that particular space. Inside that particular space, we can just also load, we can just specify the class loader that has to be used, or the garbage collection loader which has to be used there. Okay, so I'll just tell you how this works, how this Eden space, server space, go old generation works when we are moving to generational collection. Okay, and this is where the new objects is being collected by the garbage collector. So as you see here, my heap memory has only objects. So what I have to do is I have to garbage collect it. How they are collecting it? So one of the we have an n number of garbage collector. Actually, we have 4 garbage collector mainly involved in Java. Okay, my Java gives 4 types of garbage collector to be used, and all these garbage collector are based on a certain algorithm or a special algorithm called generational garbage collection. Okay, so the knowledge about this is very important. So let me start with that. So when an object is newly created, so we know that if a garbage collection or a garbage collector is triggered, the object with no references is being collected, and also the object with reference will be added a particular value called age. Okay, so if this is my first cycle of garbage collection, that particular objects which has crossed that collection, the crossed that cycle, will get an age of 1. Okay, so in that case, in every JVM that has a threshold value, or which is being checked with this age, so that it can be changed from young generation part to old generation part. They are just promoting it. Okay, promoting from young generation to old generation, so that it can be garbage collected further. And if you see here, my newly collected object is being placed in the Eden space. Eden space is one of the part of young generation. So this is done before marking. once the first cycle is referred as minor GC cycle. Minor GC, actually the GC is nothing but garbage collection, garbage collection algorithm. So the garbage collection algorithm which is being run in the young generation part, okay, it is called minor GC, or in programmatically they used to mention it as GC, okay. Whereas the garbage collection algorithm that runs on old generation part is called major GC. In program they used to mention it as full GC, okay. So if you compare this two algorithm, this two minor GC algorithm and major GC algorithm, minor GC algorithm works or runs very fast compared to major GC algorithm, because we have quite a lot of data in old generation that has to be processed, so it requires more resources to work on, right? So now let's start with this minor GCE, which is done only on the young generation part. So if you see here, I have just mentioned my unreferenced objects. Unreferenced objects or the null pointing objects in orange color, and blue is one where my objects, actual objects being used is mentioned. Okay. So at any time, I have one surveyor space will be empty. Okay. What happens is my minor GC cycle, all my run unreferenced objects will be deleted. That is the first step. And by second step, this objects will get an age, or will get an increment in their age value. So age is the term which specify here, okay. Say for example, these objects will get an incremented age of 1 here, okay. So this is the end of minor GC cycle 1. So by the end of this cycle, what happens is we'll have an empty Eden space and we'll have an empty S1 space, whereas I have some objects in my S0 which has the age 1. And then when my minor GC2 cycle 2 has been triggered, what happens is up to this, and also this minor GC cycle is triggered automatically when your Eden space is full. Okay, so at the end of cycle 1, my Eden space was empty, but when I further do my programming, I'm just creating new objects and my Eden space again fills up, and again this cycle 2 is being triggered, and where the unreferenced object is first deleted and the referenced objects is again moved to the next survey space, available survey space. It is here in this case it is S1, and my old objects which was referenced and kept in S0 or was also transformed or promoted to this S1. And here up to this part, if any of these objects is become unreferenced or become null or is not at used, okay, that is also removed in this part. So it just goes on in a cycle where you're at any point of your cycle, minor GC cycle, at any point of the cycle, okay. So your Eden space will be empty and one of your survival space will be empty. So say for example, here my threshold value is 8. So what is this threshold value? We need some kind of condition to promote one person to another stage, right? So for example, if it is a teenager, it is between 15, or after 15 it is, or 15 to after 20 it is like an adult. So we need some criteria to be fixed here to promote from one generation to another generation. So that kind of criteria is the threshold value here. So this is, in this example I'm setting it to 8. It depends upon the JVM. Okay, this values depends upon the JVM. So here it is like my threshold value is 8. So I'm just converting my space which has acquired the age of 8. I'm just changing that particular object from young generation to old generation. So 10 shed is nothing but the old generation part. Okay, so here it will be garbage collector by the major GC cycle, right? And followed by here, so this is the garbage collectors which was given by Java, and we have 4 kind of collectors: serial GC, parallel GC, CMS GC, and G1 or garbage first collector. So serial GC is one which works on single threaded environment. So if you see the previous algorithm, what we see, that particular algorithm, this generation algorithm which we deal so far, is available in all these collectors, garbage collectors, okay. And the difference between these collectors is the way how they perform. Say for example, in serial GCE, it is single threaded environment. And whereas in parallel GCE, it is multiple threaded environment. And this is the default GC for Java 8. And followed by CMS is concurrent mark and sweep collector. And followed by G1 garbage first collector. This is the collector which is the default garbage collector for Java 9 version. Okay. And these are the flags which is used to set this particular GC as my garbage collector for my program. Okay, I'll just show you a dia, show you a program, so which uses this particular. Okay. Okay. So if you see here, this is one of my small program. So here we are just we are having a string. Okay, here I'm just having a string variable, and I'm just creating new string variable. Say for example 3 million string variables. So if you see here, this loop is running 3 million times, which means that I'm just creating here 3 million new strings using my old string. So I'm just putting it into a container, and that's all fine. It's a map. Okay, string container is nothing but a map. Here in line number 13 you could see this, my map definition, my map declaration for putting all these new strings. So what happens is this particular code runs 3 million times, so which means that this particular line, the creation of new string, is actually 3 million new string has been created. Now what happens if I explicitly call the GC? So this is one of the way where we explicitly call the GC. Another one is runtime.gc. That is also one of the operation, or one of the way we can call the GC explicitly. But remember, if you call the GC, it is not that your garbage is being collected. The only difference is your objects will be mentioned as, or it will be marked as, it has to be collected. Okay, only when the next GC is being triggered. Say for example, only when the Eden space is filled and the next minor GC is triggered, the marked object which you mentioned as which you want to collect will be collected. Okay, so it is not that immediately if you call the system.gc your garbage will be collected, or your objects will be collected. Okay, so it just marks it, and this is again it just calls your finalize method of the object class to mark the particular object, and then for the next minor cycle it just uses it to clear the object. Okay, and if I try to run this particular program, so here I'm just going to use this particular, I'm gonna use my, so this particular VM, which is the serial VM. So I'm just going to show you how this particular program works on a single threaded environment. So if I use the serial GC algorithm, and this is my minimum size and minimum size of my heap to specify, and this is my maximum size where my heap can be extended, and this is nothing but the verbose tool here I'm using just to forward the output of GCE to my standard output so that it is visible to all of us. Okay, so I'm just running it, and if you see here, once again, so this is the message we are just giving on the start of the program. Okay, line number 21, and followed by this, if you see here, this is the verbose GC log value. Okay, so GC log value in the sense garbage collection log values, which was just forwarded to our standard output just because we are using the verbose tool. So if you see here, this output may look pretty different, but if you get into it, you'll have a clear idea. As I said, minor GC is mentioned in the programmatically as a GC. Okay, So if you are seeing GC, it means that your minor GC has been triggered. And here allocation failure is nothing but I'm failing to create new objects, fail to create new memory, memory allocation for new objects. So if since I'm creating 3 million objects, I had a full of hidden space, and that's why I cannot further create an object. So that's why my minor GC has been triggered. So within this bracket, you can see why this garbage collector algorithm minor GC has been triggered. Okay, and followed by this, the first number here we are specifying. Actually, we can just cut this into two parts based on this arrow mark. So this first part of number which specifies the heap area before GC algorithm. Okay, the heap area, the size before GC algorithm has been triggered, and this is the space of the heap area after the GC, which means that it has been garbage collected, and we have memory, more memory for program to more memory for further object allocation, and this is the maximum size of my heap. Okay, and this is my time required to deal or to run this particular minor GC algorithm. So if you see here, we have two minor GC algorithm has been two cycles of minor GC algorithm, and this was the information I just gave once I have finished my object allocation. Okay, so object allocation, once I have finished my object allocation, there was a small message I gave here. And if you see here, this full GC is nothing but your major GC. Major GC actually works on old generation part. Okay, and the reason why this major GC has triggered is because I have given this system.gc in my program, which is in line number 32. Okay, so that's why the GC, full GC or major GC has been triggered. And similarly, this is the size of heap. This is the this is the total number of object being this is the total number of size which is was there before the heap before the GC has been triggered, and this is the total available heap size after the GC being triggered, and this is the maximum maximum capacity of the heap size. Okay, maximum capacity of my heap, and this is the total time I took to run my full GC or the major GC. So if you compare this minor GC time and major GC time, you could find the difference, because it is double the size of the minor GC. Full GC takes double the size of minor GC algorithm, which means that it requires more resources. It is heavy. Okay, so this is just a small work on how the GC is being used here. And now we are getting a question like, if a particular is it possible to reuse an object which was marked as to be garbage collector? Say for example, if I'm having a particular object and this garbage collector has marked this as the object to be collected, can I use it again? Can I revert it back so that I can use it again? Yes, it is possible. It is possible through finalize method. Okay, so when you just try to uh, allocate your object to a new static variable, okay, which becomes that static variable will be available throughout the Java instance, isn't it? So your object will be available throughout the Java instance and it will not be collected. But there is a exception case, since it has been mentioned as finalized. So when the next GC is triggered, there is a case. Okay, but still, if it is a static variable allocation, this is one of the trick or hack, but it is not recommended to use, because we won't be aware, we not be knowing what the overall security of our object. Okay, so it is not actually recommended. And moving on to our Java 8's programmatic features. So the first part is functional features. Okay, functional interface. So functional interface is the one, nothing but the interface which has only one function or only one functionality to be performed. If your interface contain only one method, it is a functional interface, and there is no need of any keywords and all here. So it in Java 8, we have a number of functional interface, predefined number of functional interface in java.util.function package, and can just make use of it, and followed by this functional interface. So if we have an interface, we need to implement it, right? So we need to implement it in order to use it. So in order to implement it, we have the concept called lambda expression, and this is a powerful expression, the powerful concept which helps us to write a precise compact code. Okay, so this lambda expression is nothing like it is like anonymous method, but the only difference is lambda expression does not have a return type. You don't need to specify the return type. Unlike a method, you don't need to specify a return type here. So if you see here, the left hand side of the arrow mark, okay, so what we call, so this is the parameter, or this is the actual arguments you generally use. You can either specify the type of the argument or you can just leave it. So in this case, if you see in the first example, I'm not specifying the type of my variable, and followed by this argument on the right hand side argument, or right hand side of this arrow mark is the actual implementation, or what that method should do. Say for example, if your method is display, and inside if you are trying to display your name, that system.out.println, that is your line, that is your implementation, right? So that implementation will be should be written after this arrow mark. Okay, so your implementation should be on the right hand side part, and your argument that the method is using should be on the left hand side part. So in Java 8, you can either specify the type of argument, as in this case, or you can just leave it. So both is valid. And you can also specify uh, a method or an expression with no arguments. That is also possible. And if you see here, that here I'm not specifying any return type. In all these cases, I'm not specifying the return type, even though I'm just comparing it with the method. I'm not specifying the return type. So in this third example, if you see, like, it is a one line expression. So my lambda expression can be a single statement or a block of statement. I can include if else part, everything, but still it is not recommended, because lambda expressions is mainly for a single for a precise code. So we usually not recommend a big block of operations inside a lambda expression. Okay, and why you go for lambda? Because of the generalization. So if you see here in this previous code here, I'm not specifying what type of my variable, what is the type of my variable, what is the type of s, or here what is the type of x, what is the type of y, what is the type of z. I'm not specifying here. So it is mainly for generalization. And optimization, in the case here, I'm just making a parallel operation to be done. So parallel, say for example, my collection has 1000 values, and all these 1000 values will undergo this implementation, and this kind of parallelism is achieved by lambda expression. And of course, laziness, I'm not going with any big code to perform this parallel operations. And this kind of lambda expression is mainly used combined with the stream API, so that your operation of infinite elements can also be done in a finite amount of time. Okay, so on this regular and readable, so let's have a short example on lambda expression. So if you see here, this is my functional interface. So functional interface is the interface which contains only one method or only one functionality to be performed. So this is my custom functional interface. I have created my own functional interface called my interface. Okay, and I have only one functionality which is called display. This is my functionality here. And this lambda expression is mainly before lambda expression, let me tell you that before lambda expression, how we used to implement our method, a single method, is we have to create a inner class to implement a particular method of an interface. Okay, say for example, usually we used to compare interface with an abstract class, right? So here I have two examples. One is my interface, again it is a functional interface. Another one is an abstract class. So just like this, both has a single method, single abstract method, and both of the methods has no implementation. And inside my driver code, my lambda expression code, inside my driver code, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to implement these two methods in both lambda way and in both like a inner class way. Okay, so here I'm just creating an object reference for my interface, and here if you see, this is my inner class way. So before Java 8, it was this way how we implemented a particular method of an interface or an abstract class. Okay, so we used to create an inner class, just which just inner class in the sense we just create an anonymous object of an inner class, and we can just you make use of it. Okay, so this is how we did. And after Java 8, I have this lambda expression which is so small and precise and compact, and I'm just making the same implementation here. If you see here, I have to specify my full method here. My full implementation has to be specified here inside my driver code, whereas here I'm just specifying what the implementation has to be. So I'm not specifying the runtime, the return type, or the method name. That is not at all necessary here. So I'm just implementing it. So this is actually the implementation. So we need to call it. So we are just calling it, and we'll be getting the same thing. So this is for the interface I have done, and this is same for implementing an abstract method too. So lambda expression is used to implement a functional interface and also an abstract method. So if you see here, abstract method, we have a method which is just like we have implemented it in inner class way. Okay, so the same way, and we have just implemented it using the lambda expression, the same thing. So if I try to run this, I won't have a much difference. Everything works the same, and the only difference is my code has been reduced. My code is very precise and readable format, whereas if you see, this is not a readable format at all, isn't it? So you have quite confusion with this format, inner class method. So which is also a very heavy too, because you are creating another class. Okay, so the creating another class requires more resource than just creating a method. Lambda expression is nothing but a anonymous method kind of thing, so your resources also being saved here. So this kind of parallelism can also be achieved here. So if in this case, if you see, if I have my element, if I'm not here, I'm not passing any element. If I'm having my I'm just passing a collection as a argument towards a lambda expression, and I'm just specifying some operation on the elements of the collection. What happens is, if I have 1,000 elements, all the 1,000 elements will be manipulated with this operation. Say for example, just adding two numbers, or just concatenating a value with the previously available element, all the 1,000 value will be done here. So the parallelism has been achieved here. I'm not using a loop here in order to iterate over 1,000 elements. So the parallelism has been achieved here. And one of the things to be noted while using the lambda expression is the exception. Okay, so if you're going with the exception, so here, if you are coming with an exception inside a lambda expression, say for example here, this is one of my program where I'm just creating a function interface. I'm having a function interface. I'm having a reference variable f for my function interface. So this function interface has a method greet, which is just greeting a single print statement. Along with it does, or it throws an exception. Okay, if my lambda expression implementation, or if my lambda expression has an exception being created, I have to make, or I have to add a throws clause in the method declaration. Okay, so this is the one we have to note down when we are dealing with lambda expression. Say for example here, this is my interface, right? And inside, this is the method for which I'm this is the method I'm implementing through my lambda expression. So here I have to add this throws exception part, throws class. Okay, so this has to be noted down, because we just go on a flow, and we just forgot all this part, and this has to be noted, and this is a very important part. And if you don't do this throws class, if you don't insert this throws class, then this leads to an error. Okay, and moving quickly with the other concepts. So if you want a better readability than the lambda expression, then yes, you have a choice called method reference. So if you see here, this this particular expression is more this particular expression is more readable than this particular expression, because I know what is my class name and what is my method name. Here it is not that much readable, right? So if you want a better readability, you can go with method references. So method references comes in 4 different ways. One second. So if you see here, I have an interface here, and I have a constructor, and I have a static method, I have an instance method. So inside this, I'm just creating method reference. Okay, I'm just gonna call all these static method, instance method, and constructor. So this is the syntax which we generally use. So class name followed by a double colon followed by the static method. So if you want to call a static method, then you have to specify the class name followed by the static method, double colon static method. If you want to call the instance method, then instance method are bound to the objects, right? So we have to specify the object followed by the instance method. So if you see here, class reference is nothing but the object for my method reference class. So I have created an object and I'm just using it to call my instance method. And followed by this, I can also call a constructor through this method references. So using my class name followed by the new keyword. So this is how I call my constructor. And followed by this, I have another option for method references. This is quite interesting. So if you see here, I have also used the for each method, which is a method which is available a part of Java 8. So this for each method was introduced in Java 8. Mainly it is useful in collections concept. Okay, if you want to go with collections and items, n number of items, and you don't need to specify the for loop or extended for loop, you can straight away use this method for each method to display all the operations. So let me run this particular. So if you see here, I have this is the output. This is the print statement I have given inside the static method, my instance method, and my constructor. And this this class name and instance method, this is generally used to refer your arbitrary objects. So arbitrary objects is in the sense, you can also here, if you see here, so this kind of syntax is mainly used with the predefined classes and predefined functions, where we don't need to if you are creating an object. So if you see here, println statement is not a static method, okay, but still I'm using my class name to call this, because here it is like an arbitrary object. We are just you making use of an arbitrary object, okay, arbitrary. So for this also we can go with method references. So since we have time is, so default interfaces. So default interfaces, where we generally use it for inside an interface. Previously, it was like interface does not have any implemented methods, right? So every methods are abstract. But in Java 8, we have these default methods where the implementations are specified. And the advantage is there is no need to refactor the code. Say for example, one second, I will show you an example. So if you see this interface, this is one of my interface, okay, so where I have my 3 abstract method and 1 default method. So if you want to specify default method, you have to just use the keyword default followed by the method and its implementation. So this is how we specify the default method. And I have a class called bike which implements this vehicle interface. So if you see here, I'm just trying to make use of this methods here. So I'm not having the method called turn alarm off. So I have the brand. I'm just having my speed up, slow down, and all these are available in the interface. Okay, my vehicle interface. If you see here, so these are the brand, speed up, slow down. These are the methods, abstract methods, whose implementation has to be specified in the class where I'm implementing it. So say for example, it is the bike class where I'm implementing it. So I have done all my implementation here. what it has to do when I call this method. Whereas for default method, I'm not my implementation is available in the interface itself, so I'm not going to implement it in my bike class. So turn alarm on is my default method. So if you see here, still I'm calling it. So what happens if I print it? So the information inside the default method is also being used just like the implementation of other abstract method. Okay, so what is the advantage of this? Why should I go with this? Why cannot implement it in my implementation class itself? Why do I need a default method? Say for example, if I have this bike interface, bike class is the one which I have already done. I'm just surrendering it to my customer, and he again comes and asks me to add another method inside my interface called turn alarm off. Okay, he wants to add another method into my interface. So if I create a turn alarm on here, okay, as a static variable or something, so all the previous class of by class where I have implemented it will ask me to implement all other methods. Okay, so which means that my old code will not work. Okay, so if I make it as abstract class, my old code will not work, because there is a principle that when you are implementing a particular interface inside your code, all the methods, all the abstract method has to be implemented inside that particular class. Just to avoid it and just to support the backward compatibility, we are going with default method. Okay, so if you see here, I have a method called class. So I have a method called scooty. So here I just want to include this alarm class also. Okay, so I can just make use of it. If I do it with default method, I can just implement it without affecting my previous or old class bike. Okay, so this is how it works. So your new class works pretty good, and at the same time, if you go and check your old class, which was bike, right, so that also works. Okay, so your bike class also works and your new class also works without affecting the compatibility. And this is how it works. And if you see one issue here, the diamond problem. So in Java, you might have studied like Java does not support multiple inheritance, but there is an exception here. Java 8 supports multiple inheritance on behavior and not on state. On behavior in the sense multiple inheritance on methods. Okay, so here if you see my I'm just taking out my previous example. So vehicle is my interface. Okay, now I'm just creating a new class. Okay, where I have already implemented this vehicle interface. At the same time, I want to implement another interface called alarm. So alarm is also an interface here. Okay, so if you see here, alarm is also an interface, and I have an already another interface called vehicle. Okay, so this is also an interface here. So if you see here, both the interface I have to implement in my class. So Java 8 allows you to implement more than one interface, but here you have an exception. So previously, before Java 8, it was like we have all abstract class or abstract methods, so there was no conflict at all. But here, if I have more than one methods, more than one default methods with the same name. Okay, so for example, in vehicle interface, I have a method called turn alarm on and turn alarm off. At the same time, In alarm interface, I have the method, default method with the same name. So what happens is, here when I try to implement this in my class car, okay, so here I'll be getting a diamond problem, which means that which interface default method should I implement? Okay, so this is a diamond problem, but still this is not a problem. This is one of the advantage. Here we are just promoting multiple inheritance on behavior in the sense on methods. We are not implementing the multiple inheritance on state. So we have a solution. So what you have to do is we have to specify the interface name of that particular method. So if you see here, so we must explicitly specify the method which is on which the particular interface belongs to. We have to specify the interface name followed by the method name. This gives us a clear idea of which interface default method should I use in my implementation class. Okay, so that's what I have to. So here I'm just implementing it. It is not like implementing, you are just returning here. Okay, so we have to explicitly implement the default methods which has the same name in both the interfaces. Okay, so since I have two methods has same name, one is turn alarm off and turn alarm on, both has the same method. So I'm just explicitly implementing it in my implementation class. Okay, and here inside this implementation I'm just making use of my already available default method. Okay, so it is alarm interface turn alarm off has to be called when I try to call this turn alarm off. And say for example here, if I try to call this turn alarm on, it is the vehicle class turn alarm on method, default method has to be called. So it is crisp and clear here. So I'm just specifying which default method has to be called, so there is no chaos or confusion here. Okay, so followed by this we have the default static method. So static method is similar method which is used inside an interface, but the only difference is instead of default keyword you use the static keyword here. So just like a static method inside a class, how we used to implement, how we used to call it, stat class name dot method, right? Similarly here we'll be using like class name dot this method name, static method. Here it is like interface dot static method name. That is the case. So that is the end of the session 1 on day 1 agenda. So any questions? Thank you all. If you have any questions, kindly unmute yourself and ask the questions. I'm ready to answer. Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
myself Dr. Santosh Kumar Patra,
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
asking
Yes, sir.
what is the application of Java in the day-to-day life?
So actually, most of our applications today, we are saying we are just stick to the internet, right? So most of the web-based applications are developed in Java. So most of our mobile applications are developed in Java because mobile is nowadays Android as being a very major role, right? So Android's one of the pillar is Java. And if you go with cloud side, you have a number of tools and number of languages being developed based on Java. Say for example, cloud is the future, right? So we have every data has to be managed in cloud. So if you see here, Jenkins, Joule, Golang, everything is based on the Java language. So if you have a clear idea about Java language, then it is easy to work on that particular tool in an optimized way. So that is very important.
Then,
Is my answer okay for your question?
yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Then there is the different the levels of Java, Java 8, Java 9, etc. or anything else.
Yeah, actually, Java 8 is the most business organizations are using Java 8 nowadays. Okay, so but the current version is Java 14. But once if you have learned the Java fundamentals, it's better to go with another framework, a Spring or something else like that. So a combined learning, a continuous learning on Java will give you a better fruitful future than just sticking with the fundamentals of Java. A framework kind of thing will help you. Spring and Hibernate, all those things.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, sir.
I'm Rahul Shah from Baramati. Can we get PowerPoint presentation and recorded session of this thing?
Sure, sir. You can. I'm sure that you can get the recorded session. You can have to contact the organizer, I guess. The organizer has to decide it, I guess.
Can you provide the email ID of the organizer?
Organizer is the college. 1 second, sir. Let me send you. You can
If
call.
yes,
You
if
are
possible,
Selvan ma'am,
put
right?
the
So,
contact details.
Professor ma'am.
Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Great Shalini.